Nowadays, it's basically a given that whenever a new killer in Dead by Daylight comes out, they'll most likely have some kind of anti-loop ability, in order to help them catch survivors during a chase. Singularity has the overclock mode, Xenomorph has the tail attack, Chucky has the slice and dice ability, and so on. And whenever a new killer comes out that doesn't have anything like this, they're immediately considered not very good, as was the case with Sadako's release. However, during the game's early days, this design principle wasn't at all a priority for the developers when creating new killers. For example, the original versions of the Raid, Michael Myers and the Doctor basically had absolutely nothing to help them during a chase. But how did everything change and how did we get to where we are today? Well, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the rise of anti-loop killers in Dead by Daylight, so without any further ado, let's get right into it. When Dead by Daylight was officially released to the public during the early summer of 2016, looping wasn't really a thing back then. See, originally DBD was designed as a simple cat and mouse game where hiding was the main premise for the survivor role. In this hide-and-seek simulator, which was actually considered a horror game back then, stealth was the biggest priority for survivors, and this was pretty accurately reflected in the map design. Trials were much darker overall and featured quite a bit of more mist compared to today, as well as other foliage and grass patches which also enhanced the survivors' hiding abilities. And so, because stealth was such a big aspect of the game, nobody really bothered to learn how to use resources such as pallets or window vaults. Most survivors would just run in a straight line without looking behind themselves and mindlessly pre-drop every pallet they ran through. Like, this was more or less the skill ceiling of a little over 80% of 2016 survivor players. Because of all of this, the developers weren't really concerned with creating anti-loop abilities when designing killers. Trapper had his bear traps, Hillbilly had his chainsaw that could insta-down, and Nurse could still teleport through walls. However, none of these were intentional decisions in order to counter survivors' cheesing, as it was called back then. The developers were more or less just concerned with, creating really cool characters, and they weren't thinking about balance and stuff like that. Fun fact, this is actually why the Nurse turned out as and still is the most overpowered killer in Dead by Daylight. Eventually though, survivor players realized how much things were in their favor. For example, maps featured almost 2 times as many pallets back then compared to today. There were infinite loops and other crazy stuff. After some time though, most of these issues were resolved, however the damage had already been done. Stealth was no longer considered a viable strategy, and instead looping was now the meta. This was around the time when Clown was released in the game, which many people consider to be the first killer that was made with anti-loop in mind. Funnily enough, today he is considered to be one of the weakest characters in the game though. Things got to a point where pretty much all new killers would now come with an anti-loop ability. Demogorgon had the Shred attack, Oni has the Blood Fury ability, the Deathslinger has his Redeemer, Pyramid Head has a ranged attack, Blight is incredibly speedy and can hug tech, Victor can jump over pallets and windows, Trickster has blades, Nemesis can perform a Tentacle Strike attack, the Cenobite summons chains, and the Artist can spawn her Birds of Torment. Now, this killer right here was the beginning of something that would end up not being very healthy for the game as a whole. See, the whole entire portrait of a murder chapter basically incentivized gameplay that revolved around holding W. For example, one of Jonah's perks, Overcome, literally extends your speed boost after being hit by 2 seconds. The new map for that chapter, Eerie of Crows, was also originally set up in a way where there were many loops chained together, which once again incentivized holding W. But by far the biggest offender of this was the new killer, the Artist. Now, because this killer can set up her bursts in a way where as a survivor you're literally going to get hit no matter what if you stay at that loop, you've basically only got one option, that being to leave the loop and pray that there is a connected tile nearby. At first, this wasn't that problematic, since this was the first and only killer at that time which was designed this way. And also the next one released after that, Sadako, didn't have any major anti-loop ability. But as time went on, more and more killers were implemented which utilized the leave the loop or get hit playstyle, for example the Dredge. Now granted, this killer is by far not the worst case of this, as there is in fact quite a bit of skill involved from both the survivor and killer side regarding the Dredge's remnant. Like, most of the time it boils down to a 50-50, at which a good player is likely to correctly guess the other player's move. However, when the Forged in Fog DLC was introduced on the 22nd of November 2022, this update saw the addition of one of the most hated killers in Dead by Daylight's entire existence. I am of course talking about the Knight, a killer who can instantly spawn a guard at a loop and essentially force any survivor to leave the area, otherwise they're pretty much guaranteed to get hit. This character became even more hated when people realized that you could literally stall the game for a whole 60 minutes by utilizing the strongest generator defense builds at that time. Thankfully though, most of these perks received very significant nerfs, and this playstyle has largely become less and less problematic over time. In addition, it was recently discovered that the Knight's guards have pretty strange AI, since if they're chasing a survivor who drops a pallet, they will immediately stop following the survivor and will instead prioritize reaching the dropped pallet first before continuing with the pursuit. This is honestly really weird and I don't know why it's like this. Nonetheless, this killer is currently disabled anyway because of a, game-breaking bug / exploit. However, there was an even bigger offender of the leave the loop or get hit playstyle that was released right after the Knight. Skull Merchant, as you all know, functioned very differently prior to her recent rework. Honestly, she was a lot more simple and easy to understand back then, but simple doesn't necessarily mean better. First of all, the Skull Merchant could set up a drone, and if any survivor stayed near that drone for a set amount of time, they would become exposed. These drones, however, could be disabled relatively easily. However, the problem was that if the Skull Merchant set up a drone while she was chasing a healthy survivor, that survivor would have no other choice than to leave the loop and hope that there was another one connected to it. Otherwise, they risked getting insta-downed. Naturally, this design was met with a lot of criticism from the community. Not only was there no ability for skill expression from neither the survivor nor the killer side regarding the Skull Merchant's gameplay, but this killer was also incredibly good at holding 3 gens. And all of this led to one of, if not the fastest rework in DBD's entire history. Now, by fast I mean that there was very little time between the killer's release and their eventual rework. And even though it felt like forever for Skull Merchant to receive significant changes, 6 months are a lot less compared to other killers that have received reworks. For example, Freddy, Clown, Doctor, and so on. Now, I can't say how much better Skull Merchant is after her rework in terms of design. Honestly, I don't even know how she functions right now, and I probably won't bother learning that in the near future. And this is how we got to the current state of Dead by Daylight, where I can confidently say that the last 3 killers, those being the Singularity, Alien and Chucky, are all pretty well designed in my opinion. And I hope that this streak of well-made killers, I guess you could call it, will continue in the future. Well, yeah, I guess that was it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, then make sure to let me know by leaving a like, and also I would be glad if you considered subscribing as well. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!